reactor known as Chicago Pile 1.106. The point at which a reaction becomes self-sustaining became known as going critical. Compton reported the success to Conant in Washington D.C. by a coded phone call, saying, "The Italian navigator, Femi, has just landed in the New World." 107. Note 5. In January 1943, Grafton's successor, Major Arthur V. Peterson, ordered Chicago Pile 1 dismantled and reassembled at the Argonne Forest site, as he regarded the operation of the reactor as too hazardous for a densely populated area. 108. The new site, still operated by the Metallurgical Laboratory, became known as Site A. Chicago Pile 3. The first heavy water reactor also went critical at this site on the 15th of May 1944. 109, 110. After FIA, operations at Site A were moved about 6 miles, 9.7 kilometers, to DuPage County, the current location of the Argonne National Laboratory. 102, Hanford. By December 1942 there were concerns that even Oak Ridge was too close to a major population center, Knoxville, in the unlikely event of a major nuclear accident. Groves recruited DuPont in November 1942 to be the prime contractor for the construction of the plutonium production complex. The president of the company, Walter S. Carpenter, Jr., wanted no profit of any kind. For legal reasons a nominal fee of $1 was agreed upon. 111. DuPont recommended that the site be located far from the existing uranium production facility at Oak Ridge. 112. In December 1942, Groves dispatched Colonel Franklin Mabiers and DuPont engineers to scout potential sites. Mabiers reported that Hanford site near Richland, Washington, was ideal in virtually all respects. It was isolated and near the Columbia River, which could supply sufficient water to cool their reactors. Groves visited the site in January and established the Hanford Engineer Works, HU, codenamed Site W. 113, Under-Secretary Patterson gave his approval on the 9th of February, allocating $5 million for the acquisition of 430,000 acres, 170,000 ha. The federal government relocated some 1,500 residents of nearby settlements, as well as the Wanapum and other tribes using the area. A dispute arose with farmers over compensation for a large crowd of sullen-looking workmen at a counter where 2 women are writing. Some of the workmen are wearing identify photographs of themselves on their hats. Hanford workers collect their paychecks at the Western Union office. Crops, which had already been planted. Where schedules allowed, the Army allowed the crops to be harvested. But this was not always feasible. 113. The land acquisition process dragged on and was not completed before the end of the Manhattan Project in December 1946. 114. The dispute did not delay work. Although progress on the reactor design at Metallurgical Laboratory and DuPont was not sufficiently advanced to accurately predict the scope of the project, a start was made in April 1943 on facilities for an estimated 25,000 workers, half of whom were expected to live on site. By July 1944, some 1,200 buildings had been erected and nearly 51,000 people were living in the construction camp. As area engineer, Mabiers exercised overall control of the site. 115. At its peak, the construction camp was the third most populous town in Washington state. 116. Hanford operated a fleet of over 900 buses, more than the city of Chicago. 117. Like Los Alamos and Oak Ridge, Richland was a gated community with restricted access, but it looked more like a typical wartime American boomtown. The military profile was lower, and physical security elements like high fences and guard dogs were less evident. 118 Canadian sites. British Columbia. Cameco had produced electrolytic hydrogen at Trail, British Columbia, since 1930. Urey suggested in 1941 that it could produce heavy water. To the existing $10 million plant consisting of 3,215 cells consuming 75 MW of hydroelectric power, secondary electrolysis cells were added to increase the deutera concentration in the water from 2.3% to 99.8%. For this process, Hugh Taylor of Princeton developed a platinum on carbon catalyst for the first 3 stages while Urey developed a nickel chromia 1 for the 4th stage tower. The final cost was $2.8 million. The Canadian government did not officially learn of the project until August 1942. Trail's heavy water production started in January 1944 and continued until 1956. Heavy water from Trail was used for Chicago Pile 3, the first reactor using heavy water and natural uranium, which went critical on the 15th of May 1944. 119, Ontario. The Chalk River, Ontario, site was established to rehouse the Allied effort at the Montreal Laboratory away from an urban area. A new community was built at Deep River, Ontario, to provide residences and facilities for team members. The site was chosen for its proximity to the industrial manufacturing area of Ontario and Quebec, and proximity to a railhead adjacent to a large military base, Camp Petawaya. Located on the Ottawa River, it had access to abundant water. The first director of the new laboratory was Hans von Halban. He was replaced by John Cockcroft in May 1944, who was succeeded by Bennett Lewis in September 1946. A pilot reactor known as ZEEP, Zero Energy Experimental Pile, became the first Canadian reactor, and the first to be completed outside the United States, when it went critical in September 1945. ZEEP remained in use by researchers until 1970. 120, a larger 10 MW NRX reactor, which was designed during the war, was completed and went critical in July 1947. 119, Northwest Territories. The El Dorado mine at Port Radium was a source of uranium ore. 121, heavy water sites. Although DuPont's preferred designs for the nuclear reactors were helium-cooled and used graphite as a moderator, DuPont still expressed an interest in using heavy water as a backup. The P9 project was the government's code name for the heavy water production program. It was estimated that 3 short tons, 2.7 t, of heavy water would be required per month. The plant at Trail, then under construction, could produce 0.5 short tons, 0.45 t, per month. Groves therefore authorized DuPont to establish heavy water facilities at the Morgantown Ordnance Works, near Morgantown, West Virginia, at the Wabash River Ordnance Works, near Donna and Newport, Indiana, and at the Alabama Ordnance Works, near Childersburg and Sylacauga, Alabama. Although known as Ordnance Works and paid for under Ordnance Department contracts, they were built and operated by the Army Corps of Engineers. The American plants used a process different from Trail's. Heavy water was extracted by distillation, taking advantage of the slightly higher boiling point of heavy water. 122, 123, uranium. Or, the majority of the uranium used in the Manhattan Project came from the Shinkolobwe mine in Belgian Congo. The key raw material for the project was uranium, which was used as fuel for the reactors, as feed that was transformed into plutonium, and in its enriched form, in the atomic bomb itself. There were 4 known major deposits of uranium in 1940, in Colorado, in northern Canada in Joachimsthal in Czechoslovakia, and in the Belgian Congo. 124, Orbach Joachimsthal were in Allied hands. A 1942 survey determined that sufficient quantities of uranium were available to satisfy the project's requirements. 125. Nichols arranged with the State Department for export controls to be placed on uranium oxide and negotiated for the purchase of 1,200 short tons, 1,100 t, of uranium ore from the Belgian Congo that was being stored in a warehouse on Staten Island and the remaining stocks of mined or stored in the Congo. He negotiated with Eldorado Gold Mines for the purchase of ore from its refinery in Port Hope, Ontario. The Canadian government subsequently bought up the company's stock until it acquired a controlling interest. 126. While these purchases assured a sufficient supply to meet wartime needs, the American and British leaders concluded that it was in their country's interest to control as much of the world's uranium deposits as possible. The richest source of ore was the Shinkolobwe mine in the Belgian Congo, but it was flooded and closed. Nichols unsuccessfully attempted to negotiate its reopening and the sale of the entire future output to the United States with Edgar Sendia, the director of the company that owned the mine, the Union Minière de Haute-Katanga. 127. The matter was then taken up by the Combined Policy Committee. As 30% of Union Minière's stock was controlled by British interests, the British took the lead in negotiations. Sir John Anderson and Ambassador John Winant hammered out a deal with Sendia and the Belgian government in May 1944. Fourth mine to be reopened and 1,720 short tons, 1,560 t, of ore to be purchased at $1.45 a pound. 128. To avoid dependence on the British and Canadians for Groves also arranged for the purchase of U.S. Vanadium Corporation's stockpile in Uravan, Colorado. Uranium mining in Colorado yielded about 800 short tons, 730 t, of ore. 129. The raw ore was dissolved in nitric acid to produce uranyl nitrate, which was processed into uranium trioxide, which was reduced to highly pure uranium dioxide. 130. By July 1942, Mallinckrodt was producing a ton of highly pure oxide a day, but turning this into uranium metal initially proved more difficult. 131. Production way too slow and quality was unacceptably low. A branch of the metallurgical laboratory was established at Iowa State College in Ames, Iowa, under Frank Spedding to investigate alternatives. This became known as the Ames Project, and its Ames process became available in 1943. 132. Uranium refining at Ames. A bomb pressure vessel containing uranium halide and sacrificial metal, probably magnesium, being lowered into a furnace. A bomb pressure vessel containing uranium halide and sacrificial metal, probably magnesium, being lowered into a furnace. After the reaction, the interior of a bomb coated with remnant slag. After the reaction, the interior of a bomb coated with remnant slag. A uranium metal biscuit from the reduction reaction. A uranium metal biscuit from the reduction reaction. Isotope separation. Natural uranium consists of 99.3% uranium-238 and 0.7% uranium-235, but as only the latter is fissile, it must physically separated from the more plentiful isotope. Various methods were considered for uranium enrichment, most of which was carried out at Oak Ridge. 133. The most obvious technology, the centrifuge, failed, but electromagnetic separation, gaseous diffusion, and thermal diffusion technologies were all successful and contributed to the project. In February 1943, Groves came up with the idea of using the output of some plants as the input for others. 134. Contour map of the Oak Ridge area. There is a river to the south, while the township is in the north. Oak Ridge hosted several uranium separation technologies. The Y-12 electromagnetic separation plant is in the upper right. The K-25 and K-27